They were negotiating my life like a used car. I didn't slam the laptop shut. I didn't gasp or cry out. I just stood there breathing slowly the way you do when you know panic will cost you more than silence ever will. If you've ever been underestimated, replaced, or quietly betrayed by the people closest to you, don't skip this story. What happens next might feel uncomfortably familiar and deeply satisfying. Something in me clicked into place, calm and sharp as if my body understood before my heart did. I already knew I wouldn't forget this moment. I also knew I wouldn't waste it. It was 7:42 p.m. on a Thursday, the kind of evening that smells faintly of burnt coffee and old paper. My father's kitchen light buzzed overhead, flickering the way it always did when rain was coming. I had come over to help him print insurance forms because his hands shook too much these days. His laptop sat open on the table, my name glowing at the top of the screen. The email wasn't meant for me. It was written in careful, professional language. Polite. Almost generous. $50,000. A clean transfer. A solution. My fiancé's name sat neatly below my cousin's as if they already belonged together. My father had signed it with the same closing he used for church emails and holiday cards. I felt the sting before I felt the meaning. Not anger. Not yet. Just that hollow feeling behind the ribs, like air rushing out of a cracked window. I noticed strange details first. The date on the draft. The fact that it wasn't new. The confidence in the wording, like this conversation had happened before. I could tell this wasn't an impulse. This was a plan. Behind me the printer whirred and jammed. I reached down automatically, fixing it with one hand while my eyes stayed on the screen. That small motion steadied me. I've always been good in quiet emergencies. I caught my reflection in the darkened window, gray streaks in my hair, my face unreadable. I looked older than I felt. I also looked invisible, which I realized had been my advantage all along. The email mentioned my cousin's stability. Her flexibility. Her ability to give him a life I apparently could not. No insults. No cruelty. Just a neat comparison like numbers on a balance sheet. I pressed my lips together and tasted copper. My father hadn't defended me. He'd replaced me. I thought of the Sunday dinners. The small jokes at my expense. The way decisions had been made without me for years. Pieces slid together in my mind, uncomfortable but clear. I scrolled once. Fully. There were replies. Short ones. Agreement without hesitation. Gratitude. That part hurt more than the money. The house creaked as someone shifted their weight down the hall. I closed the email but didn't shut the laptop. My hands were steady. I picked up my purse and quietly slipped a folded document inside, one I'd brought earlier without thinking much of it. Only later would I understand why that instinct mattered. My phone buzzed. A message from my fiancé. Running late, it said. I let out a sound that might have been a laugh if anyone had been there to hear it. Late for what, I wondered. The future he'd already sold? I wiped the table with a paper towel that left streaks. The kitchen smelled like lemon cleaner and something sour beneath it. I rehearsed nothing. I didn't need words yet. I needed faces. I needed tone. I needed to see how comfortable they were wearing what they'd done. When he finally arrived, rain clinging to his jacket, he smiled the way he always did, easy and careless. My father followed him into the kitchen, talking about traffic. I stayed by the sink, hands folded, heart slow but loud. Did you print the forms? My father asked. I met my fiancé's eyes instead. Just held them. Long enough for the silence to stretch. Long enough for something to flicker across his face that didn't belong there. Yes, I said softly. But I think we need to talk first. And that was when he knew. He glanced at my father, then back at me, searching for a cue I didn't give. My father reached for his glasses, a habit he had when conversations made him uncomfortable. The rain outside grew louder, tapping against the windows in uneven rhythms. I stepped away from the sink and sat down at the table, placing my purse carefully at my feet. The chair scraped too loudly and all three of us flinched. No one spoke. The air felt thick, charged with something unfinished. Something wrong? My fiancé asked, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I looked between them, knowing this moment would divide my life into before and after. I opened my mouth to speak, and the room held its breath. I closed my mouth again, let the moment stretch, and realized something important as they waited for me to explode. I didn't owe them a reaction. I stood up slowly, picked up the printed forms, and slid them into my father's folder like that was the only reason I had come. My fiancé watched my hands instead of my face. That told me more than his words ever could. I said I was tired, that the rain was making my knees ache, that we'd talk later. My voice sounded normal. Pleasant even. That seemed to unsettle them more than shouting would have. "Are you sure you're okay?" my father asked, already reaching for an excuse. I smiled at him. Not warmly. Just politely. "I will be," I said. And I meant it in a way he didn't understand. No one followed me to the door. That was the first confirmation that I was right about everything. Outside, the rain hit my face hard and cold, like it was trying to wake me up. I didn't rush. I unlocked my car, sat behind the wheel, and rested my forehead against it for a moment. My hands trembled then, just once. I waited until they stopped. I didn't go home. Not yet. Instead, I drove to the grocery store, the one that stayed open late. I walked the aisles slowly, listening to the hum of the freezers, grounding myself in ordinary things. Bread. Soup. I bought only what would fit in one bag. Something about that felt right. Temporary. Intentional. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the house looked exactly the same as it always had. Porch light on. Curtains half drawn. I unlocked the door and stood there listening. Nothing. I moved room to room, noticing details I'd ignored for years. The dent in the hallway wall. The chair he always dropped his coat on. I didn't feel sentimental. I felt clear. I packed quietly. No drawers slammed. No trash bags. Just careful choices. Documents first. The envelope in the back of the filing cabinet. My passport. A folder I'd kept from an old job, one my father never knew I still had. I hesitated at the closet, then took only the clothes I actually wore. The rest belonged to a life that wasn't real anymore. My phone buzzed again. A call this time. I let it ring. Then another. I turned the sound off and slid the phone into my pocket. Silence felt like control. I slept on the couch for an hour, waking before dawn with a stiffness in my back and a strange sense of relief. The decision had already been made somewhere deep inside me. My body was just catching up. By morning, the house smelled like dust and leftover rain. I made coffee and drank it standing up. I wrote a note, not dramatic, not detailed. Just enough to say I was leaving and would be in touch when ready. I didn't explain. I didn't accuse. I folded it once and placed it where it would be found quickly. Then I picked up my bag and walked out. The drive felt longer than it should have. Traffic moved slowly, everyone heading somewhere with purpose. I wondered how many of them were quietly reinventing themselves without anyone noticing. At a red light, I caught my reflection again in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. Older. But steadier than I had in years. I stopped at a small motel just off the highway, the kind with faded curtains and a blinking vacancy sign. The clerk didn't ask questions. I paid cash. The room smelled like cleaner and old fabric. I sat on the edge of the bed and let myself feel it then. The grief, sharp and sudden. Not for him. For the years I had tried so hard to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. By midday, messages started piling up. My father. My cousin. Then him again. I didn't open any of them. Instead, I made one call of my own to someone I hadn't spoken to in a long time. She answered on the second ring, surprised but kind. We talked about practical things. Work. Timing. Possibilities. I gave her very little context. She didn't ask for more. That afternoon, I mailed a small package from the motel lobby. Inside it was something I'd kept safe for years, unsure why. The woman behind the counter stamped it without looking at me. When it slid into the outgoing bin, I felt a shift in my chest. Not relief. Readiness. As evening came, I sat on the motel bed, watching the parking lot lights flicker on one by one. I knew they were confused by now. By the lack of drama. By my absence. They would be expecting tears, anger, bargaining. They would get none of it. I lay down fully dressed, hands folded over my stomach, listening to the distant sound of cars passing. I wasn't running. I was repositioning. And somewhere, without realizing it yet, they were starting to feel that something had slipped beyond their reach. That thought stayed with me the next morning as sunlight crept through the thin motel curtains and landed across my hands like a quiet challenge. I didn't rush. I showered, dressed neatly, and checked out without conversation. My car became my small moving world. I drove with the radio low, stopping only for gas and coffee, letting the miles stack up behind me. I had nowhere dramatic to go, just a practical address and a promise I intended to keep to myself. The first weeks were humbling. I rented a small room in a house owned by a woman my age who believed in minding her business. I found temporary work that paid little but asked even less. Each evening I wrote lists. Not dreams. Skills. Contacts. Gaps I could fill if I was willing to learn again. Learning at my age felt different. Slower maybe but deeper. I listened carefully in rooms where people underestimated me. I took notes by hand. I asked questions that sounded simple but weren't. At night my body ached, but my mind stayed sharp, replaying conversations, catching patterns others missed. My family faded into background noise. Messages slowed then stopped. That silence told me more than apologies ever would. I wasn't missed. I was inconvenient. Once I accepted that, something hardened in me, not bitter, just firm. I stopped waiting for acknowledgement that would never come. A small opportunity opened through the woman I had called from the motel. Nothing flashy. Just steady work tied to information and trust. I showed up early. I left prepared. I noticed things. People began asking my opinion then relying on it. I didn't advertise my past. I let my consistency speak instead. There were moments I doubted myself. In grocery store lines. In quiet evenings when loneliness pressed in. I wondered if disappearing had been a mistake. Then I'd remember the email. Though. The certainty with which my life had been traded. The doubt would settle into resolve. I changed how I spoke. Less explaining. More listening. When people tried to rush me, I didn't hurry. I had learned patience from years of being overlooked, and now it worked in my favor. I saw how often people revealed themselves when they thought no one important was paying attention. One afternoon I ran into someone who knew my father. The conversation stayed polite, but there was curiosity underneath it. Questions not asked directly. I answered carefully, saying little, revealing less. I could feel the shift when they realized I wasn't what they expected anymore. Money came slowly then more steadily. I lived modestly, saving what I could. I kept records. I organized papers others tossed aside. I understood systems because I had lived inside them without benefit for so long. That understanding became leverage, though I didn't use it yet. There were small tests I set for myself. Situations where I could speak up or stay silent. Each time I chose restraint, I felt stronger. Control wasn't loud. It was knowing when to move and when to wait, and trusting myself to tell the difference without needing approval. I heard about my cousin through distant channels. Nothing detailed. Just enough to confirm that life had moved on without me. That stung less than I expected. I wasn't competing anymore. I was building something separate, something quiet and solid that didn't require their belief. At night I slept deeply. My shoulders loosened. My jaw unclenched. I noticed my reflection changing, not younger but steadier. My face looked like someone who had made a decision and stood by it. That mattered more than beauty ever had. There was a moment, months in, when I realized I was no longer afraid of running into them. The fear had drained away without ceremony. In its place was clarity. I knew what I knew. I had proof of things they assumed were forgotten. And I understood timing. By the time the invitation arrived, forwarded casually through someone else, I read it without my pulse quickening. A family event. Public. Unavoidable. I set it aside and finished what I was working on, hands steady, mind clear. They had forgotten me during these years. That was their mistake. I had been paying attention the entire time, gathering strength in places they never thought to look. And whatever I had become in their absence, it was something they would not be able to ignore when the moment finally arrived, whether they were ready for it or not, and whether they welcomed it or feared it deeply, for reasons they could not yet name or escape, or undo once revealed, publicly, painfully. They would not be able to ignore me when the moment finally arrived, and that knowledge settled into my spine as I stepped out of the car and into the soft noise of the wedding venue. The building was modest, a community hall dressed up with white lights and rented flowers. I paused near the entrance, letting the door close behind me, feeling the air change. Conversations carried, then thinned. I hadn't been announced, but recognition travels faster than introductions. I straightened my jacket and walked in. My cousin spotted me first. Her smile came too quickly, then stalled. She looked at me the way people look at unexpected weather. My father was nearby, talking to someone from church. He stiffened when he saw me, his shoulders lifting just enough to show surprise he hadn't prepared for. No one approached. That was new. I signed the guest book carefully, my handwriting steady. A woman I barely knew touched my arm and said my name with relief, as if she'd been wondering whether I was real. We exchanged polite words. I could feel eyes on my back, weighing me, reassessing old assumptions that no longer fit. The room hummed with small noises. Silverware. Laughter. A baby fussing somewhere near the back. I moved slowly, choosing where to stand, where to sit. Power, I'd learned, often came down to placement. I didn't hide, but I didn't rush forward either. My fiancé saw me across the room. His reaction was delayed, like bad reception. His face shifted through recognition, disbelief, something like regret. He started toward me, then stopped when my cousin's hand closed around his arm. That small gesture answered questions I hadn't asked. Someone asked what I'd been doing these past years. I answered simply. Bernie. Living. I didn't list achievements. I didn't need to. The tone changed anyway. People lean in when they sense substance beneath restraint. My father approached at last, careful, formal. I didn't know you were coming, he said. I was invited, I replied. Nothing more. His eyes searched my face, looking for weakness or accusation. He found neither. The absence unsettled him. There were moments I felt the old pull. Habit. Family gravity. Then someone asked my opinion on a practical matter, something minor but real. I gave it. The conversation shifted. Authority isn't declared. It's granted quietly by those who recognize it. I noticed how often my cousin checked on my fiancée, how tightly she smiled. I noticed how he kept glancing my way when he thought no one was watching. I noticed who avoided me entirely. Avoidance is its own confession. During the ceremony, I sat near the aisle, hands folded, breathing even. I listened to the vows without judgment. They sounded rehearsed. Safe. I wondered if anyone else felt the strain beneath them, the effort it took to hold that picture in place. Afterward, a man I'd worked with briefly years ago approached, surprised to see me. We spoke about mutual contacts, current projects. Nothing secret, nothing dramatic. Still, I could feel attention turning toward us, curiosity sharpening. Context changes everything. My father watched from a distance, his face tight. I could see him calculating, trying to understand what I knew, what I might say. That fear was new. It sat on him awkwardly. Later, my cousin finally came to me. Her voice was light, but her eyes were guarded. It's good to see you, she said. It's been a while, I replied. True enough. Silence stretched. She filled it with small talk that went nowhere. I excused myself and stepped outside for air. The night was cool, carrying the smell of cut grass and spilled champagne. I felt steady. Not triumphant. Prepared. When I went back in, the room felt different. Quieter around me. People were listening now. Whatever story they'd been telling themselves about my disappearance no longer worked. The power had shifted, not because I demanded it, but because I no longer needed their permission to stand where I was. I stayed longer than expected, not out of obligation but observation. Each interaction confirmed what I had sensed on arrival. People recalibrate quickly when certainty dissolves. I answered questions honestly without volunteering details. I laughed when it felt natural. I declined invitations politely. My calm seemed to echo louder than any announcement. Even the music sounded lower, as if the room itself had adjusted to a new balance. By the time the cake was cut and plates were passed, the narrative had shifted. I was no longer an absence to explain away. I was a presence that required consideration, and that awareness settled into the corners of the room, lingering, waiting, and refusing to be dismissed. No one could quite name it, but everyone could feel it clearly. Even the music sounded lower, as if the room itself had adjusted to a new balance. I stayed where I was, holding that quiet, until my father finally walked toward me with a stiffness that didn't belong to age alone. "Can we talk?" he asked. Not as a father. As someone unsure of his footing. We stepped into a narrow hallway near the restrooms. The laughter from the reception dulled behind us, replaced by the hum of old lights and the sharp smell of cleaner. He didn't waste time. "I didn't think you'd come back like this," he said. "I thought you'd moved on." "I did," I replied. "Just not the way you expected." He studied my face, searching for something familiar. When he didn't find it, his voice shifted. "You seem prepared," he said, like the word unsettled him. "I am," I said, and reached into my purse. The paper felt heavier than it should have. I unfolded it slowly, watching his eyes move line by line. Numbers. Dates. Names. His breathing changed as understanding set in. This wasn't an accusation. It was proof. Of money moved quietly. Of choices made confidently. Of consequences delayed, not avoided. You knew, he whispered. I knew enough, I said. And I waited. Footsteps echoed. My cousin appeared, smoothing her dress, followed by my former fiancé. Their expressions froze when they saw us together. I hadn't called them over, but unease has a way of pulling people closer. What is this? My cousin asked, taking the paper from my father's hands. She read quickly. When she finished, she didn't look at me. She looked at him. The man she'd chosen. He stared at the floor. That silence answered more than words ever could. I didn't think it would matter anymore, he said. It always mattered, I replied. You just hoped it wouldn't. No one raised their voice. No tears. The truth landed softly, which made it impossible to deny. My father leaned against the wall, suddenly smaller. What do you want? He asked. The question surprised him when I smiled. Nothing, I said. I already took back what mattered. I told them I hadn't come to reclaim or punish. I had come to be seen clearly once without begging or explaining. I felt years of tension loosen as I spoke. They listened because they had no escape left. I walked away before the moment could turn messy. Back into the reception. Music swelled. Someone laughed. Life continued, careless and loud. I collected my coat, hugged my brother, and stepped outside. The night air was cool and steady. I stood there, breathing deeply, noticing how my shoulders had dropped, how my jaw no longer ached. I thought about age, about how clarity often comes later, not because we are slow but because wisdom takes time to earn. In the car, I rested my hands on the wheel. I expected anger to rise. It didn't. Instead, there was space. Quiet. A feeling I hadn't known in years. As I drove, streetlights passed in even rhythm. I wasn't replaying the conversation. I wasn't rewriting it. That was new. Closure hadn't come from winning. It came from release. I finally understood. Revenge was never about them. It was about returning to myself without regret. I didn't win by taking anything back. I won by letting go, and leaving them alone with everything they thought was worth losing me for. If this story spoke to you, you're not alone. Subscribe for more real, emotional stories about strength, betrayal, and finding your power later in life. There are more truths waiting to be told.